There are funds who will support diverse founders. You've just got to look out for them and network and hear about them. But it requires extra effort. And that's what it shouldn't do, right? It should be like, if you have the right product, then you should get the funding. But as we know, it's those gaps are not closing quick enough. But I'm definitely seeing a shift even in the last 2 years.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders. From purpose-led entrepreneurs to Olympic champions, you'll learn firsthand from today's successful listeners on what it takes to be brilliant, all in just 40 minutes. Today, I'm joined by Eleanor Kaye, Executive Director at Newton Venture Programme, a joint venture between London Business School and Local Globe VC. Newton Venture Programme is on a mission to ensure the next generation of VCs represent the world we all live in by running programs for people from overlooked or underestimated backgrounds who want to break into VC or accelerate their career in the sector. Social mobility and diversity in venture are topics very close to our hearts at JBM, and we're huge fans of the work that Eleanor and the Newton Venture team are doing. So I'm really grateful that she's joined us today for a chat to share her story, mentorship, and industry insights with you. So Eleanor, welcome to 40-Minute Mentor. How are things?
Oh, really well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. The rain has just cleared up, so I'm taking that as a good sign that this is a good time to chat.
Definitely. And I have a rainbow right outside my door, which is a fantastic sign of what to come. So I think we should just dive straight in with some kickoff questions, which we always like to do. So Eleanor, can you finish the following sentences after me? My first job ever was...
Oh, that's taking me back. So my first ever jobs, I've worked throughout my whole education from when I was about the age of, I think, 13. And my first job was a waitress in a local pub. I grew up in a horse racing village, and I think I was being paid about £2.50 an hour. And on the days that horses came in big, that was the day the tips were good. But I think, after that, I worked while I was traveling. In fact, I used to sell accidental death insurance in Australia a long, long time ago.
Oh, wow.
I pot washed. But I think if you're talking about my first ever job, that was my sort of step into my career, I got a job as a PA in a music distribution company. It was probably the best job to get as a young sort of 22-year-old. Gigs and fun galore. It was certainly an experience.
Awesome.
I worked with some really interesting people. Yeah, it was great. I got to go to gigs all the time.
Ah, well, that would have been my perfect job. I love live music and spent a lot of my youth going to gigs and seeing lots of live stuff. So I'm very jealous. Next question. Brilliance to me means?
Brilliance means to me being self-aware. I think someone who's brilliant listens well, they share their own knowledge, they're open-minded and curious, but they acknowledge their own limitations and they're clear on their own boundaries. And I think that is brilliance in my own mind.
That's a great answer. And self-awareness is something that a fair few leaders I've met along the way have not always been, but also so many brilliant mentors that have come on this podcast. I think that's one of the real superpowers that I've seen, is a consistent thread of a lot of the best people we've had on have been very self-aware. So that's a fantastic answer. Thank you. A misconception people have about me is?
That I have it all together. This is far from the truth. I think on paper, people think, oh, wow, you're executive director, you're running a business, you're working in some really interesting industries. Your network is incredible. You're a mother of two. You're balancing, your social life, your career, motherhood. I think that's just the tip of a very busy and crazy iceberg. And this being a father yourself, like there's so many things to balance. But I think it comes to the whole sort of social media. I think what you put out there is not necessarily what the truth is. And I think it's really important not to form opinions or judgments on people when you just see a snippet of their life, whether that's on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever social media you're on.
So true, so true. The swan analogy is very accurate for me a lot of the time. Well, I mean, I don't even think I'm that graceful above water anyway, but there's lots of plates spinning, consistently beating myself up about not feeling like I'm doing anything justice. And yeah, I think a lot of people think if you're running a business, you've got it all sorted, but that's very often not always the case. Finally, can you share something that we couldn't learn from your CV? So that could be a perceived failure or a setback in your career, but something that you've learned a lot from.
Totally. So I hinted at the fact I was a mother. 22 months of my career was spent looking after the hardest managers I've ever had, my now 5 and 3-year-old. And I was so grateful to have had the privilege of taking 11 months off work to be with them when they were newborn. But when I came back from both parental leaves, I was given roles that were like way beneath my capabilities, and my confidence was low. And I accepted the roles very gratefully. And actually, I should have questioned the positioning of them. And this was a huge setback for me personally. And like I said, on paper, people would see progression, and I saw setbacks. And, I think that's something that potentially parents who take parental leave, and especially extended time off, have to contend with. Although I think we're protected a lot in the UK, there are things to be done and said to protect mothers who come back from parental leave.
It's a really, really important answer and a really good one. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like this is going to be a really interesting conversation, and so I'm very excited. I want to dig into all things Newton Venture Program, but before we do dive into that, I know you haven't had the most obvious path to VC. So can you share a quick overview of your CV? Tell us a bit about, what you did before and ultimately what attracted you to Newton in the first place.
Totally. Yeah, like you hinted at, or like I also explained earlier on, I started my career in media. I worked in music, TV, film, comedy. And my dad was in the media industry when I was growing up. And when I was 15, I got some work experience in a post-production company in Soho, London. And it was exhilarating for me. All I did was carry around massive reels of film across Soho. It was very manual, but I loved it. It was exciting and, probably one of my funnest summers. And I, from then on, I just attracted to the excitement of the media industry and fell into music, and I was in gigs and went into comedy production and TV production, all working in operations functions. So running offices or studios. And that was really cool. I wasn't on the creative side, but I was really good at getting things done and processes. And I kind of fell into this operations side of things quite early. The failure, or one of the annoying things about being very proactive and good at getting things done, is that I often automated myself out of roles. So often with no obvious progression path in front of me, I was always managing teams, reporting directly into MDs and CEOs. I would end up being sort of forced into leaving roles to get better salaries, more responsibilities. And after I left the media industry, I joined Money Supermarket, which is an online comparison site. And I really loved it there. I really enjoyed myself. I enjoyed the team. It was sort of my first sort of experience with SEO and the importance of customer experience. And I was there through the merger with Money Saving Expert and what happened with them. And, that was really exciting times. But I was headhunted for a operations role across at Palantir Technologies. And I was offered full autonomy, managing a team across EMEA, lots of opportunities to travel the world. And to be honest, it just sounded dreamy. And I think what I hadn't expected was the biggest learning curve of my career. I was working ridiculous hours, 6 days a week, working with some of the smartest and most difficult people, sometimes not coming home for more than a few hours or even days at a time as I was traveling so much. But it was so impactful on me as a person and a worker, because you were consistently challenged, and the sort of responsibilities put on you were beyond, you could even imagine. And the better you were, the more responsibilities you were given. And so your growth was just exponential. And I loved that. I loved it for that. I loved being, working and solving what they call the world's hardest problems. So that was really exciting. And then Newton. So I left Palantir and was sort of taking a step back. I really wanted to consider what I wanted to do with my life. I was becoming a very sort of small cog in a very large machine at Palantir, and I missed the human impact, the human capital element of the world. And I was approached for this role at Newton as a head of operations, and it was ticking all the boxes. And one of the things that I was most excited about was the learning again, learning about an industry that I hadn't particularly even known about around venture capital. And I was able to utilize all my skill sets, and it's been nearly 2 years I've been there, and I think it's the first job where I felt fully fulfilled pretty much every day. So in that respect, I can't really complain.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something everyone can say about their jobs, let's be honest. Obviously, you'd come from a different background before. So was it quite daunting to move into, an organization like Newton, a relatively unique business? It'd be good to sort of learn a bit more about it. But also, I would love to understand how you felt making that transition into the venture space. How did you overcome any initial nerves or imposter syndrome you may have felt?
I think everybody has imposter syndrome. There's an element of maybe denial, but I think you can own it. And I think that's why I'm like the perfect poster child, perhaps, for Newton's goals. Can you be taught venture? And here I am. I'm 2 years in. I can talk pretty competently around venture capital. Like everyone else who does our programs, I've learned with them. I'm part of a community and a network. And I think that's been something I could own. It's made me one of the cohorts, and it's okay to not know everything. And actually, it's what you put into our programs. That's what you get out of it. And I was absolutely loving learning again. And that's part of the powerful thing around providing learning and development programs, is that you can learn with people, and there's always something new to challenge your perspectives or ways of doing things. One of the nice things around venture capital is that you're not only exposed to the venture capital industry, but also all the portfolio companies that they are dealing with, such as ag tech and health tech and fintech, and all the up and coming technologies that are coming out of the life sciences. And that's really exciting. And I think that's what drives me, is learning not just about how to be a good investor, but also about the emerging trends that are coming through technology.
Amazing. I'm sure that our listeners are teased into wanting to learn more about Newton, but we're going to come on to that. But before we do, you obviously joined as head of ops and then have progressed into an exec director role. So what does your day-to-day look like in that position? And how did you find that transition from a pure ops role to this exec director role?
Great question. So full transparency, I still handle all the operations for the business. And I only recently handed over running the program to our new head of product about 3 months ago. So I guess you could say I've been very busy. I think the shift to exec director is around thinking about the strategy and the growth. And I'm meeting a lot of people and getting out there and talking about Newton to the people who matter, the people who haven't heard about venture capital. And how can we tell people who potentially venture capital would never have even come on their radar that this is a potential career path for somebody? And so I'm just trying to get out there, spread the word. Not necessarily that it's a sales technique. I'm actually quite passionate about what we do every day in opening doors and building opportunities for people who perhaps wouldn't have had that without us, but also sharing the word on a broader scale. I think perhaps the new generation of venture capitalists we're training are more impact focused. And I think that's potentially due to the messaging that we're putting out there. And that's quite special. So the transition is slow. It's been over a year since I've been executive director, and I'm hopefully going to be handing off the operations in the early 2023. Gosh, where is time going? But that might be quite interesting to take away the part of my skill set that I'm so proud of that I've built up over the years. So it would be an interesting period for me.
How would you say your operational background has helped you in this role? It'd be good just to dig into that, because there's going to be a lot of people listening to this that are from ops backgrounds. So it'd be good for them to hear a bit about where you can take that skill set.
I think if you've been working in some kind of ops function, you learn pretty quickly to make decisions at pace. And I always say this to my colleagues, if you propose an idea to me and I look a bit affronted, it's because my brain not only looks back to what we've done in the past to changing those, and the sort of risk management of that, but also it's working always sort of 10 to 20 steps in the future about what the impact would be. And it does take me time to process these things because I can't think without thinking about the next steps. And I think that's a massive superpower. I think powered with someone who is a creative or someone who is very innovative, your ops power are the kind of things that perhaps creatives can only dream of. And so I think if you realize your own potential and like I mentioned earlier on, your limitations, you can position yourself as a superpower in itself. Like, how can I support you in building out a company? How can I use my skill set to help drive the company through its hypergrowth stage? And that's basically what I've always done. I've always been brought on to accelerate processes, make them happen, whether it's, opening up offices across the whole of Europe and Middle East and building out all the processes that make things work efficiently so that the workers there don't have to think about anything, to building out a company that had no sort of processes in place at all, to being fully functional, profitable business. And I think if you're self-aware enough to understand like what your skill set is and how that fits into a business model, then you can sell yourself really quite efficiently. Because a lot of people hate this stuff. A lot of people really hate the nitty-gritty detail. And, I think about the amount of times where I've thanked my past self for being diligent because I haven't, I've gone, oh no, I haven't thought about this. And then I've looked back and in my neat folder, I've got XYZ, like risk management folders that I can just pull out. But, it might seem very careful and considered in your approach, but I think those are the people that will save you from a bit of a nightmare in the future.
I'm interested, what made you want to go for, like, you've clearly built this real deep specialist skill set, which has stood you in good stead throughout your career. You've continually progressed. You've worked in hyper growth organizations. You've gone into this new organization. You'll clearly use that to good effect. And now you're handing that off to and doing this new role, which has a very different flavor, albeit I'm sure there's some crossover. So what is it that has made you go, now is the time to pass? And I know this is part of progression, but I'm asking this because I know a lot of operators who just want to always do ops. So they were happy being a COO forever because that's what they love. And they really don't want to be forward facing out in the industry, fundraising, strategy, doing all that sort of stuff. I'm just interested what is it about for you that made you want to make that leap? And for others listening that maybe don't have the confidence yet to take that leap of faith and sort of evolve that skill set further, what would be your advice to them?
I think perhaps because my main ambition isn't to be the person in power. I haven't sat there going, this is my trajectory. It's kind of happened quite organically. And actually, I'm quite good at it. I'm quite good at the people aspect of it and the building connections and partnerships. And it's perhaps something that, because I haven't got that potentially overzealous way of attacking partnerships or sales, it means that it's less imposing. Like, I think it's just a case of I maybe have a more practical way of thinking about things that isn't all about one goal. It's sort of a long-term solution to a problem that I'm quite passionate about. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's going to be making that decision that I needed to hire someone to support me. I mean, my first step was getting a PA who is my lifesaver. I never ever thought I'd be in a situation where I'd need to rely on that. But honestly, without her, I wouldn't know what I would do. And it's kind of how I think about hiring around me anyway. I hire people who have skill sets that I don't have and have different ways of thinking, because they complement me and make me think better and challenge me. And that's basically what it's got to be. It's got to be a hiring that will take on the operations of the business, but do it better than I could. And that's quite hard to say when you are a specialist. But the only way you're going to get great people is by allowing them to grow and develop under a safe umbrella. And that's all I can ask for is our next hire in operations, is that they are able to grow and own things in the way they do things. And that, I also don't really have time to sort of sit there and say, you haven't filed this absolutely correctly in the way that I would do it. And I don't think that's good for anybody. Micromanagement is the squasher of any talent. But, that transition is going to be hard for me, but it's exciting too. And I can only think of great things that will happen for Newton when I've got that time to grow and in my own role.
Awesome. Yeah, sometimes it's about putting yourself out of your comfort zone, isn't it? And a lot of the best leaders I know have sort of taken a bit of a leap of faith, and it's about kind of pushing themselves to the next level and adding strings to the bow. And I think your operational background and the leadership that comes often in those operational roles, I think will stand you in good stead. So you're clearly doing a fabulous job already, but hopefully that will inspire others that might be keen to make a similar sort of move.
I really hope you're enjoying today's episode so far, but before we continue hearing from today's mentor, I wanted to take a minute to give a shout out to our series sponsors, Alchemist. Alchemist is an industry-leading learning and development company, using immersive and interactive experiences to help increase employee engagement, levels of happiness, and achievement across your teams and overall productivity. Alchemist presents L&D departments with an opportunity to innovate and be bold in their approaches to blended learning. If you love the sound of this as much as we do here at JBM, then head over to thisisalchemist.com/40-minute mentor to learn more. And now back to our 40-minute mentor.
We touched upon Newton, but let's jump into that now. So can you tell our listeners a bit about what the Newton Venture Programme is all about, and how did that partnership originally come into existence between LBS and Local Globe?
Sure. And what a great partnership it is. I mean, the amalgamation of top decile VC practitioners and some of the top faculty from London Business School coming together to teach people. I mean, this is the creme de la creme of teaching and development courses. So they basically, Local Globe were looking to increase diversity in the venture capital ecosystem. And we could talk a bit about that later, but essentially they wanted to do that by upskilling folks and teaching them about venture capital. And LBS were looking at creating a venture capital program, but wanted to find top decile practitioners to also come and teach as a part of that. So somebody connected them both and were like, you're both looking at doing similar things. Let's create a joint venture. And Newton Venture Programme was created. They were meant to launch their face-to-face program back in 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020. And so there was a big pivot to delivering an online program in early 2021, which is when I joined. And so the online program was launched first. And that's a sort of for aspiring tech investors, founders who potentially want to know how venture capital works, industry specialists such as doctors, lawyers who want to invest themselves. And so we built something that was sort of globally accessible and inclusive. It's a 10-week program, online live sessions, applied learning in groups like outside of the sessions. And you get the insights from practitioners in the VC ecosystem and faculty as well, who deal with the sort of, I guess, the life cycle of venture capital. And it's been very impactful for the folks who have taken part. And we're now at sort of 240 people who have taken part in our online program so far. And we finally were able to do our VC fellowship, which was a 6-month program face-to-face at London Business School. And I thought we were building like really strong community and network until I saw the folks from our fellowship get together. That's been a massive win for me. Face-to-face learning is so impactful. Working on programs and learning from each other in an environment that's, allows you to voice your opinions safely is pretty awesome. Like I said, you get hands-on learning, helps develop yourself personally in both programs. So you think about what is your personal investment thesis? What would you be interested in if you were looking to invest? And you may have thought, I really want to get into venture capital, but never really thought about what areas. And if your background is in deep tech, potentially that would be a good place to start with investing. And that's just making you start thinking about your plan going forward and sort of set you off on the right path. And we're also got a STEM to VC initiative where we're encouraging folks with STEM backgrounds to explore venture capital, applying the skills, learned in the lab, applying them in the VC world. And we ran a sort of exploratory day last week, where we had 30 PhD students come and learn with us around venture capital. And that was really empowering, because they could see they're all students learning at the moment, but they probably didn't really know where they could go next. If they didn't want to, stay in the lab, they might want to go and use their STEM superpowers in venture capital. And that was really cool too. And, we've got a thriving, helpful, supportive Newton network. People connect online, in person. 4 syndicates have been created by alumni, and they've started making investments and building that track record. Some have moved into VC. Some start angel investing. I think anyone who sort of takes one of our programs, and some have taken 2 because they've gone from the fundamentals to the fellowship so far. It's the people who throw themselves into their learning that get the most out of it. And that's been really exciting. So I've seen people just thriving, and Newton's all about championing our fellows. We shout about them, and you'll see if you go on our website, you see we focus on them in the part of our blog. And just by sharing people's stories, and this is what you do, can just empower people to take their next step. And it's such a powerful notion. You never know how that person's life can change because we've shared about them on LinkedIn, and all of a sudden someone picks them up. And it's such a powerful sort of and very low lift thing you can do for people, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I think it's you can really see the impact. And clearly you've referenced some of the great results and outcomes off the back of the program, and I totally agree. I think by shining a light on some of these sorts of things, you can inspire in ways you never expected to, and all it needs is for one person to see something that they just needed to see on that day at that particular time, or hear about it from somebody else, and it can totally change the course of someone's life and career. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do with 40-Minute Mentor is shine a light on important programs like Newton and important topics, and share inspiring stories to play our part in providing some inspiration. So yeah, love that. Absolutely love that. I mean, there are going to be people listening to this that juices are flowing, very excited about the potential of getting involved. Can you tell us a little bit about how the application program works? Because I know you run a blind recruitment process. So what does it involve? Have you got any advice for anyone that's looking to apply that is hearing you today?
Totally. So like you mentioned, we use blind hiring. We use a company called Applied, and using that allows us to mark questions without any biases. So we don't see anyone's name, where people went to school, which country they live in. That's got absolutely nothing to do about whether you get on one of our programs. We want to see people with unique contributions, someone who's motivated to learn and willing to collaborate and share with each other. And I think, perhaps going back in a full circle back to being my definition of brilliance, that's kind of it. It's like, how can we build a cohort of people who are bringing diverse opinions, are challenging everyone's sort of best practices and ways of thinking, and bring the greatest minds into the room. And that's part of our process. Is we ask a couple of, I think it's 3 questions for the fundamentals program. And you don't have to have any venture capital experience for fundamentals. We welcome any experience to it. And we've trusted in the process. And by doing that, it means that nearly 50% of our cohorts are female, and over 80% are from overlooked and underestimated backgrounds, whether that's socioeconomic, gender, ethnicity, disability, sexuality. It shows there's just not a pipeline issue here. And so people are getting through and onto our programs, and the metrics kind of show that, which is really exciting because it means that the people in the room are willing to work with each other, get on well, share experience, share sector resources. And, they've all got different ways of thinking. And that's quite exciting to have that kind of fire in one room where everyone's sort of like wanting to learn and share from each other. I think that's really cool. Applications are opening very soon, actually. So, if you are interested, you can look us up on LinkedIn or our website, newtonprogram.vc. So you can sign up there to find out when they're open. And, don't think because you perhaps don't have a typical background about venture capital that you're not welcome. That's actually far from the truth. We would love diverse experiences and backgrounds to join us.
100%. And I think there's still a lot of in VC, there's a lot of similar types of profiles, let's say, that are investors. And I think the more diverse, the more representative of society the VC landscape is, the better for everybody. I really do believe that. I think that they'll get more access to sort of diverse founders, diverse problems that need to be solved. And I think that is good for kind of society at large. You've touched upon it there, but Newton's doing a huge amount for diversity and inclusion, for social mobility, just things that I hugely admire. But there's still so much work to be done. I guess I've just touched upon some of the challenges that I find in the industry about groupthink. But what do you think are the next steps that VCs and also broader tech companies who suffer from this as well need to think about to kind of help level that playing field even more?
Yeah, I should mention, on top of programs like Newton, there is included, especially in the UK, there's included VC and future VC that are doing this sort of similar type training and breaking down those barriers, which are so important. There's also great pledges like Diversity VC and All In, which people can sign up to. But to be honest, that's like preaching to the converted. It's really the pressure that everyone else needs to put on the people who are not really fully switched on to how important it is to have diverse voices in the room, that's what needs to happen. I do think the pressure is building. It's hard to ignore, but there's a lot of people who are, let's say, tick boxing in order to get, people off their backs. But I think the pressure is rising, and the more we can upskill folks and shout about them and get them in places where they potentially would never have got, then we will see change. But it is slow at the moment.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot of these discussions are focused on the point of entry. So the focus on efforts to attract diverse talent, we hear this all the time from our clients in our day jobs as headhunters, but there's less conversation around the retention of diverse talent in organizations and how they progress within organizations, which is often one of the reasons why diverse talent it doesn't stay in companies, and there is an attrition challenge. So can you share some thoughts on this? Have you got any advice for anyone listening about how we can do better?
Look, you've hit the nail on the head. 85% of GPs are male in Europe. Read a report from the European Women in VC in May of this year. And it's a wider conversation, but essentially, if you don't feel like you belong at the top, then you're not going to stay around very long. And I wish I could fix it. It's not a pipeline problem, as I've shown with the way our recruiting is going for our cohorts. But it's about the people in the power who are need to shout about their junior employees who perhaps are a tick box diverse hire, which is not how people want to be hired. They want to be hired because they're the best for the job. And then amplifying them and moving them up through the business so that the people who are in the room or around the boardroom table are bringing diverse opinions in. But I find it's very frustrating. And I'm a white woman, and I have so much privilege with being white. But as I spoke about earlier on, that privilege was taken away when I decided to have children. And so there are so many issues around diversity. I just don't know whether there's something. Business leaders, please hire better, use blind hiring, use amazing, recruiters, and give them really stringent hiring metrics. Before you even start conversations with potential applicants, you should have a diverse pipeline and a diverse first round. And it's got to start there.
Yeah, I think everyone has to work harder, don't they? Work harder, go deeper. It's not an excuse anymore. There isn't diverse talent out there because that's just not true. And I think we've all got a part to play in doing our bit to ensure, from a headhunter perspective, we have a role to play in terms of diversity in our shortlists. But I think organizations also need to be tougher on themselves, as you say, making sure that they are, when it comes to executive hiring, they are sometimes, and this is one of the problems, we're running some searches in the B2B SaaS space, which is notoriously, in the commercial side, notoriously male dominated. And at some point, there aren't enough CROs or CCOs, women in that space, or they're not it's kind of a self-perpetuating problem. And so one of the things that we're really trying to do is sometimes it is taking a chance on an SVP or a VP who's not made C-suite yet, but giving them the opportunity to have that role, and then shining a light and amplifying that story, and trying to encourage others down that path. I think it's been hugely frustrating to run some of those searches because just women haven't been given the opportunity. And I think that example can be used in lots of other contexts. So I think there's all a lot we can do there. On the VC side, lots of reports have shown that the funding gap isn't closing as fast as it needs to as well. So have you got any advice for any diverse founders that are listening to this that are maybe currently fundraising? What would you say to them?
Even in my short time in VC, I've seen an increase in funds with a focus on supporting diverse founders. So that's a huge difference already, which is awesome. And, we just have to keep shouting about it so that diverse founders can see where they can go to get that funding. They obviously have to have a great product as well, but it's sort of, there are spaces now that are being held for diverse founders, and I think you've just got to do a bit of research, and in fact, we shout about them a lot at Newton, about these amazing funds that are doing great things like Cornerstone VC, Black Seed VC, Overlook VC. There are funds who will support diverse founders. You've just got to look out for them and network and hear about them. But it requires extra effort. And that's what it shouldn't do, right? It should be like, if you have the right product, then you should get the funding. But as we know, those gaps are not closing quick enough. But I'm definitely seeing a shift even in the last 2 years.
That's good to hear, and hopefully we can continue that trend. More generally, looking to the broader state of European VC, what are your thoughts on that? Why should diverse talent consider a career in VC, and what other things are you excited about in the industry at large?
So I've seen drives from the European Innovation Council, and they're actively funding innovation with grants at the moment. I think what we're seeing is different ways of getting funding, whether it's crowdfunding, grants, or I think people are getting clever to finding funding without having to necessarily bootstrap or go through a VC to start with. Just give them that kickstart. I've seen there's a huge uptick in deep tech and STEM-based innovation. And the more I see sort of these kind of exciting drives happening, the more we're going to see a shift there. And I think if your question around diverse talent considering a career in VC, those with interesting and unique contributions would make excellent investors. If you can identify solutions in the problem base, you're sort of seeing trends where people might miss them. Someone's deal flow could be an excellent source to a fund. Consider your unique experience and your unique position in the world and how that could be of use to a VC firm. I think if you can see, and not only what your positioning is, but also what your talents are. And this is, going back to what we're trying to do at Newton, is help people develop their own investment thesis. You might not have ever thought about what you can bring to venture capital. And perhaps you can, even do this with any kind of career. If you feel solid in your base and what your skill set is, you can sit there in a job interview and explain why you'd be a great person or a candidate in any industry. You've just got to find your own positioning in the world and have that confidence and awareness of where where you can provide support. And I think there are a lot of barriers around jumping into VC, even knowing what venture capital is. If that's never been part of your world, then why would you have even thought that was a possible career? Then it's network. If you're potentially introverted, that could be quite difficult to break into venture if you are not that great at being a people person. But there's always ways around that. I know quite a few venture capitalists who blog, or they speak about their specialist things online. So they are building up a really good rapport with people, but potentially don't have to do those quite nerve-wracking networking events. And even financial barriers, there's options around sweat equity now, or syndicates where you could potentially put in a little bit, or even try a little bit of angel investing or crowdfunding. There are barriers, but I think it's worthwhile investigating how you can provide value for a company you're interested in without having to provide financial support. If you've got skill sets in other ways, you could be a researcher, you could be, providing talent that way in exchange for equity. Get creative, get resourceful in the way you're thinking about investing. And, that's what I would say. I know there are barriers. I really hear that. But I think we can break those down slowly and surely by thinking creatively around investing.
Great advice. Thank you, Eleanor. We're sadly at a close, but in one sentence, what do you think the future holds for Newton?
I think Newton is about the people and the community we're building. And soon we're going to be teaching people who have been through our programs, 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, we'll be teaching the folks of the future. And I strongly believe in that network and in community and the growth of Newton through our human capital development. And I think Newton will be on the map for a very long time.
Amazing. Really excited for that. I think the impact will be huge. If you could be mentored by anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I've been lucky enough to hear Reshma Saini speak a number of times through our program and also a couple of events I've been to. And she's an absolute powerhouse. She's a partner and co-founder of Seed Canvas, Seed Stage VC firm. And I love the way she describes how she can grow and develop multiple, hundreds of portfolio companies through her skill set. And I find that so powerful and inspiring. So I'd love to hear more from her on a mentor type basis. Hint, hint, Reshma, please.
Great shout. And Reshma is somebody I'd love to get on the podcast at some point so we can hear more of her amazing mentorship. Finally, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received that you'd like to pass on to our listeners today?
I think it's around making mistakes or failures. I remember getting so worked up about mistakes or fate or things that I did wrong in the past, and they really hit me hard in the heart. I take things very personally, and someone said to me, the best thing you can do from failures is learn from it and move on. And if that mistake is something that you could foresee in the future, am I really going to be regretting this or thinking about this 6 months to a year down the line? Then just try and let it go. You just need to own it, learn it, move on.
So true. That's a great place to leave it, especially for anyone that's making mistakes right now. I've made quite a few this week. So I think there's a lot to be said about drawing a line under things, learning from them and moving forward. And that's a really nice way to end it. Thank you for joining us on 40-Minute Mentor, Eleanor. It's been a real pleasure. Love what you do. Love what the program stands for in Newton. And yeah, really excited for more of our listeners to hear all about it and hopefully get involved. So thanks for sharing your story. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Please make sure you check back in on Wednesday for our final episode of this series. This time, I'm joined by Eleanor Kaye, property entrepreneur and host of the hugely popular On a Mission podcast. Trust me when I say you won't want to miss this one. Here's a little preview of what's to come.
What was quite a stable childhood became very volatile very quickly. We actually had bailiffs at the door to repossess our stuff. It was very Wolf of Wall Street. It was very standing on your table, closing deals. It was high energy. It was fast paced. It was big money. It was absolutely amazing. I just think everyone deserves a second chance in life. Your business can only grow at the same extent that you do.